He said, "Take it off. I want to see you differently." Those words struck me like a bolt of lightning, and for a moment I felt as though the ground had slipped away beneath my feet. I stood there in his office, clutching my jacket tightly, speechless and trembling. How did we get here? It all began just a week ago when my stepmother asked me to help her husband with some documents. My name is Julia. I'm 22, and I had just returned home from university in search of a little extra money. Adam, my stepfather, is a 48-year-old successful businessman, always impeccably dressed, always composed. We never really shared close moments, yet I always sensed that his gaze held something more than mere professionalism. I had no idea then how right that feeling would turn out to be. That fateful Saturday evening, when my mother had left to visit a friend, I made my way to Adam's office with a cup of tea in hand. The quiet of the house made every sound in the corridor seem amplified, and my heart pounded with a mixture of nerves and anticipation as I pushed open the door. The office itself was a study in controlled elegance, polished wood surfaces, the soft glow of a desk lamp, and a faint hint of expensive cologne lingering in the air. Every detail spoke of a man who knew exactly what he wanted. I stepped inside and gently set the tea on his desk. As I did, I couldn't help but notice his eyes lingering on me a moment too long. It was as if he were studying me, examining not just my appearance, but something deeper, something hidden behind my everyday facade. I could feel the air shift, heavy with an unspoken promise. I busied myself by arranging some papers on the desk, my mind trying desperately to catch up with the flurry of emotions stirring within me. Then, in the midst of our shared silence and the mundane rustle of paper, he spoke. "You look good in that dress," Adam said in a calm, measured tone that somehow carried an intensity one wasn't prepared for. His words hit me unexpectedly, making me pause mid-sentence and hold my breath. For an instant, I allowed a small smile to form, hoping to return his compliment lightly, yet the sincerity in his tone, and something else entirely, stilled me. It was as if his voice had unlocked a hidden part of me, a side that was both excited and terrified by the attention. I could sense that something in his demeanor had shifted. My mind raced. Was it merely admiration? Or was there a dangerous undercurrent in his gaze that hinted at desires I had never imagined? My pulse quickened, and every instinct told me to retreat, even as I found myself rooted to the spot. I remembered how the shadows in the room seemed to deepen around him, as if concealing secrets too heavy to be spoken aloud. Before I left that evening, as I gathered my things and prepared to step back into the cool night, Adam's parting words caught me off guard once more. "If you ever need anything, you can always come to me," he said softly, his voice gentle but laced with a strange, dark undercurrent. There was something in that promise, a hint that this was more than an offer of help with documents. I hesitated at the door, torn between the safety of the familiar and the thrilling, dangerous allure of the unknown. His words echoed in my mind as I closed the door behind me, leaving me with an unsettling certainty that nothing would ever be the same. Now, standing in the same space that once felt so safe and professional, I feel the weight of that night pressing upon me. The command he uttered earlier, "Take it off, I want to see you differently," reverberates in my thoughts. How had our relationship, once marked by distant formality, spiraled into something so raw and intense? I grip my jacket tighter, as if trying to hold on to the remnants of my old self, even as a new, forbidden part of me stirs awake. In that quiet office, every detail seems charged with meaning. The soft hum of the air conditioner, the muted ticking of a wall clock, even the subtle scent of leather from his chair, all conspire to remind me of the delicate line we've crossed. I replay every moment in my mind, the way his eyes held mine just a fraction longer than necessary, the inflection in his voice as he delivered his compliments, and that inexplicable darkness that flitted behind his calm exterior. I cannot tell if it is desire or something far more dangerous that draws him, but I know one thing for certain: their mingling of light and shadow has left an indelible mark on my heart. I still remember the feel of the teacup in my hands as I approached his desk, the warmth radiating against the cool metal of the stationery. There was a simplicity in my intentions, to help, to be useful, but that simplicity was shattered the moment I noticed the intensity in his gaze. It was as if, for the briefest instant, he saw through me. I felt exposed, vulnerable, and yet strangely empowered. There was no room for idle chatter or casual conversation in that charged atmosphere. Every word, every glance carried a weight that I could not ignore. Now, as I stand here, trying to steady my racing heart, I know that I am on the precipice of something life-altering. I can't help but wonder if I am ready to face the consequences of our unspoken agreement, of the magnetic pull that has drawn us together in a way that defies logic. There is an undercurrent of danger that thrills me, even as it terrifies me, and I sense that this is only the beginning of a much deeper, more complex journey. My thoughts swirl as I try to make sense of the evening's events. The memory of Adam's calm, deliberate compliment mingles with the raw intensity of his final offer of help. I recall every subtle gesture, the slight arch of his eyebrow, the firmness in his gaze, the almost imperceptible quiver in his voice that hinted at hidden depths. It all coalesces into a single, overwhelming realization: nothing will ever be the same between us. I cannot predict what will happen next, but one truth is unmistakable. The spark that ignited in that moment has set in motion a chain of events that promises to upend my entire world. The line between right and wrong blurs with every stolen glance and whispered word. I feel as though I am stepping into a realm where danger and desire intertwine, where the promise of something forbidden looms large on the horizon. And so, as I stand in this hallowed space of polished wood and lingering cologne, I know that I am at the threshold of an irrevocable change. Every beat of my heart, every whispered thought, bears witness to the transformation that has already begun. This is not merely an encounter, it is the inception of a journey into the unknown, one that promises to be as intoxicating as it is perilous. This was the first sign that something was changing between us, and believe me, what comes next will be even more astonishing. The next day, Adam invited me to dinner at a quiet restaurant, saying my mother had been delayed. I hesitated for a moment, but eventually agreed. As I entered the softly lit dining room, I saw him waiting at a corner table. His calm smile made the space feel both familiar and charged with a subtle tension that I couldn't ignore. During dinner, Adam was attentive and genuinely interested in my life. He asked about my university, my future plans, and the projects I was passionate about. Each question, though casual in tone, seemed to pull us closer together. With every reply, I sensed that an invisible thread of tension was being woven between us, a thread that tightened with each shared laugh and lingering glance. At one point, when I mentioned a recent academic success, he leaned forward slightly. "That sounds promising, Julia," he said softly. His tone was sincere, yet there was a depth in his eyes that hinted at intentions beyond mere conversation. I answered carefully, balancing honesty with restraint, while the restaurant's ambient hum and warm lighting set a mood that was both inviting and quietly charged. After we finished our meal, the evening took an unexpected turn. Stepping out into the cool night air, we walked toward the parking lot. The transition from the intimacy of the restaurant to the open space felt abrupt, yet the connection between us remained palpable. As we reached the lot, Adam suddenly reached out and placed his hand on my back. "You look wonderful tonight," he murmured. His voice was low and deliberate, and in that moment, my laughter faltered. I tried to laugh off the sudden contact, but his intense gaze stopped me in my tracks. His hand lingered a heartbeat longer than was appropriate, sending a confusing surge of shame, fear, and an undeniable sense of something forbidden through me. I managed a quiet thank you, and hurried to my car, my mind racing with a mix of exhilaration and apprehension. The drive home was silent except for the sound of my own thoughts, each one returning to his touch, his words, and the way his eyes seemed to hold a secret promise. Back in my room, I closed the door behind me, yet the memory of that lingering hand and the soft compliment echoed relentlessly. Later that night, lying awake, I found myself torn between the thrill of being seen in a way I'd never been before and the deep sense of wrongness that accompanied it. I knew what was happening was dangerous, yet every part of me craved the attention he offered. The rational part of my mind fought to dismiss the attraction, while my heart rebelled with a newfound desire. Each thought of him stirred a mix of anticipation and dread, a cocktail of emotions that left me breathless and uncertain. The next morning, I tried to shake off the memories as I attended my classes, but every idle moment was filled with flashbacks of our conversation and that unforgettable touch. I questioned whether I was misinterpreting his attentiveness or if he was deliberately drawing me into a maze from which there was no clear escape. Amid lectures and campus chatter, his image remained vivid, an unwanted yet magnetic presence in my mind. By mid-afternoon, a message from Adam arrived, confirming our dinner appointment for the coming week. This time, there was no mention of my mother or any external excuse, just a simple invitation that felt loaded with the promise of further intimacy. I stared at the message, feeling a mix of excitement and anxiety. The invitation was like an open door to a path I wasn't sure I wanted to explore, yet I couldn't bring myself to decline. That evening, as I prepared for bed, I replayed the details of our encounter on the parking lot. His gentle touch, the way he said my name, and that lingering look that seemed to read right through me, all of it forced me to confront a reality I had long tried to ignore. The memory was both intoxicating and terrifying, leaving me to wonder how much further we could push this dangerous line. In the days that followed, our interactions at home grew subtly charged. Adam's gaze would occasionally meet mine in the hallway, each time filled with an intensity that belied his usual composure. At university, I caught myself distracted by thoughts of him, the memory of that dinner and our quiet moments together intruding on my studies. My everyday routine became laced with an undercurrent of anticipation and risk. One afternoon, while I sat in a quiet corner of the library, my phone buzzed with a message from him. It was a brief inquiry. "How was your day?" The simplicity of the question sent a ripple of conflicting emotions through me. I typed a careful reply and hit send, aware that even this small exchange deepened the unspoken connection between us. The brief conversation reminded me that his interest wasn't fleeting, it was a constant, growing presence in my life. That night, as I sat by my window watching the city lights flicker, I couldn't shake the feeling that each moment with him was a step further into uncharted territory. Every casual remark and every accidental touch was gradually erasing the boundaries that had once defined our roles. I felt caught between duty and desire, logic and a dangerous allure that I could neither fully embrace nor completely resist. The balance between what was acceptable and what was forbidden had begun to blur. I knew that the next encounter would be pivotal, a turning point where the line between our everyday lives and the unspoken tension would vanish entirely. As I lay in bed, my mind was a storm of anticipation, fear, and an inexplicable yearning that I had never experienced before. I wondered how far this delicate game would take us, and if I was truly prepared for the consequences. Stepping into this new chapter, I felt a mixture of apprehension and curiosity. Each moment was charged with potential, and even the simplest gesture held a promise of something more profound. The path before me was uncertain, and every decision felt like a delicate dance on the edge of a precipice. The memory of our last night together, a night marked by soft words and lingering touches, haunted me, urging me to confront feelings that were both overwhelming and dangerous. As the clock ticked towards our next meeting, I realized that I was no longer the same person I had been before that fateful evening. The allure of his attention, the risk of our connection, and the forbidden nature of every interaction had started to redefine my world. I knew that every future conversation, every accidental brush of skin, would carry the weight of this unspoken bond. And so, as I closed my eyes that night, I couldn't help but think about what would come next. The tension between us was palpable, a silent promise of events yet to unfold. I was aware that the next chapter of our story might push us further into a realm of passion and peril, one where the stakes were higher than ever before. What began as a seemingly innocent dinner had evolved into something far more complex and enticing, something that promised to challenge everything I believed about myself. The unanswered questions, the risk of every interaction, and the forbidden thrill of his presence all left me wondering, how much further could we go? The spark was lit, and the coming days would reveal whether it would blaze into an uncontrollable fire. One thing was certain, the story was just beginning, and the next chapter promised to be even more unpredictable and captivating. Monday. With my mother away visiting a friend out of town, it was just Adam and me at home. That afternoon, Adam proposed that we have dinner together, but not at home. He suggested a small, secluded restaurant in the countryside. "You'll like the atmosphere there, it's quiet and cozy," he said. I understood immediately that this wasn't merely a casual outing. There was something more behind his invitation. Despite my inner hesitation, I agreed. We drove for what felt like hours. Adam's steady, confident hand on the wheel, his quiet determination behind the steering, amplified the tension simmering between us. I gazed out the window, watching the scenery pass by, while my thoughts churned with anticipation and uncertainty. Every so often, I caught a glimpse of his eyes in the rearview mirror, a silent exchange that made my pulse quicken. At the restaurant, the setting was intimate and refined. Dim candlelight and soft music created a warm ambience, and only a handful of tables were occupied, making the space feel almost private. Adam ordered a bottle of red wine for us and said, "This is a special evening. I want you to relax." His tone was calm and assuring, yet an undercurrent of urgency pulsed beneath his words. Across the table, our conversation began with ordinary topics, discussing the weather, work, and my university life. Yet, every question and remark seemed to carry a double meaning. Adam's gaze drifted often to my lips or lingered on the line of my neckline, as though silently communicating emotions beyond words. In a quiet moment, as I answered one of his questions, he leaned forward. "You know, Julia, I don't think you even realize how beautiful you are," he murmured. His compliment, soft yet loaded with intensity, made me catch my breath, and I found myself gripping my wine glass a little tighter than necessary. After dinner, we left the restaurant together and walked toward my car under a warm, starlit sky. The cool night air contrasted sharply with the heated tension that had built up over the meal. As we reached the parking lot, Adam suggested a detour to a nearby lake. His proposal was unexpected but carried an allure I couldn't resist. The idea of a quiet moment by the water, away from prying eyes, stirred something inside me. We parked by the lake and sat on a simple bench under the open sky. The gentle lapping of water against the shore filled the silence as I tried to steady my turbulent thoughts. Out of the stillness, Adam reached out and took my hand. His touch was deliberate, and in that charged moment, he said, "I've waited so long for this moment. I can't keep silent any longer." His calm yet earnest declaration sent a shiver down my spine, and the warmth of the night suddenly felt starkly cold. "Adam, don't," I whispered, a note of panic threading through my voice as I instinctively tried to pull away. But instead of retreating, he leaned in closer. His eyes searched mine with an intensity that made it impossible to ignore the truth behind his words. "Say that it's only me who feels this way. Say it, and I'll stop," he urged quietly, the plea in his tone unmistakable. Before I could form a response, his hand moved gently to my neck. The contact was soft yet firm, and in that fleeting touch, the world narrowed down to the space between us. I could barely breathe as his presence overwhelmed me, leaving me suspended between fear and a longing I never expected. My heart was in chaos after that night, and in the days that followed, I did everything I could to avoid him, even as it seemed Adam was everywhere I turned. On Tuesday evening, while I was in the kitchen chopping vegetables, the familiar rhythm of the knife against the cutting board was shattered by his sudden presence. Without knocking, he stepped into the room and, leaning casually against the wall, said in a low, assured tone, "Julia, let's stop these games. I know you feel it too." I froze. The knife slipped from my grasp for a heartbeat as his words sank in. I forced my eyes down and managed to reply, "Adam, stop," my voice trembling with a mix of fear and defiance. Yet, before I could retreat, he advanced closer. There was nowhere left to run. "If this is a mistake, tell me right now," he insisted, his intense gaze searing into mine as his hand reached out to touch my wrist. The contact was deliberate, a spark of heat and pressure that sent conflicting signals through my body. I knew we were playing with fire. One misstep could destroy everything. Desperation welled within me, and in that charged moment, I decided I had to escape the suffocating tension. I excused myself, intent on leaving the house to clear my mind. But before I could make my exit, Adam spoke again. "I'll drive you to the local supermarket," he offered, his tone leaving no room for argument. Reluctantly, I agreed, knowing that evasion would only delay what was inevitable. Inside the car, silence reigned. The engine's low hum filled the void as we drove in tense quiet. I stole glances at him in the rearview mirror, his face a mask of determination, his eyes dark with unspoken emotions. The air between us was heavy, charged with a mixture of anticipation and dread. Every second stretched out, laden with the weight of our unaddressed conflict. When we arrived at the supermarket, Adam suddenly pulled the car over. He turned toward me, and without any preamble, grasped my hand firmly. "We cannot pretend that this doesn't exist," he declared, his words blunt and final. His grip was insistent, and for a moment, I felt as though he was trying to force me to acknowledge the undeniable truth between us. My heart pounded as I searched his eyes, wondering if I had misread his intentions or if he was as trapped by this connection as I was. Inside the supermarket's fluorescent-lit aisles, I moved mechanically, my mind still reeling from our confrontation. Each step felt heavy, as if I were walking through a haze of conflicted emotions. I kept glancing over my shoulder, half expecting to see him lingering behind the displays, a silent reminder of the tension I couldn't shake. The ordinary bustle of shoppers around me did nothing to quell the storm raging inside. After a few minutes, I hurried through checkout and stepped back into the cool night air, my pulse still racing from the encounter. When we returned home, I went straight to my room and locked the door, seeking refuge in the solitude that should have offered comfort, but instead, The room felt suffused with the residue of his presence. Every creak of the floor and whisper of the wind against the window made me wonder if his shadow lingered just beyond the door. The intensity of our interactions had reached a point where each encounter was charged with danger and desire. I replayed in my mind the moment his hand had brushed against my wrist and the burning urgency in his eyes. It was a dangerous game, one that could either ignite a passion beyond measure or leave nothing but ashes in its wake. The risk was palpable, and I found myself wondering how much longer I could endure this relentless push and pull. Later that evening, as I sat on the edge of my bed trying to steady my thoughts, my phone buzzed with a new message. Adam's text read simply, "I know this is difficult, but we need to confront it. Call me when you're ready." His message was brief and left no room for ambiguity, challenging me to face the truth of our situation head-on. A part of me wanted to ignore it, to bury these dangerous feelings deep down, but another part, one I barely recognized, yearned to respond. For hours, I wrestled with the decision. The silence of my locked room did little to soothe the tension. Instead, it magnified every thought, every memory of his touch and his words. I was caught between the instinct to protect myself and an inexplicable pull that drew me toward him, despite knowing the risks. The line between desire and destruction blurred with each passing moment. Finally, as midnight crept in and the room dimmed to shadows, I decided to call him. My hands trembled as I dialed his number, each ring echoing in the quiet space until he answered. "Julia," he said, his voice steady yet laced with a vulnerability that caught me off guard. "I want to talk," he continued, his tone both earnest and cautious. We spoke in hushed voices, our conversation a delicate balance of tentative confessions and careful boundaries. He admitted that he, too, felt overwhelmed by the intensity between us, a force that neither of us could simply ignore. As the call ended, I lingered on the precipice of a decision that felt both dangerous and inevitable. I realized that no matter how much I tried to escape or deny it, the connection between Adam and me was a force that would not be easily quelled. The conversation had left me with more questions than answers, but one truth remained clear. The next step in this perilous dance was unavoidable, and it promised to change everything. Sitting alone in the quiet darkness of my room, I wondered how much longer I could sustain this dangerous interplay of emotions. Could I continue to live with the constant pressure of his presence? Or would I eventually be consumed by the intensity of our forbidden connection? The challenge lay before me, stark and undeniable, as I braced myself for whatever came next. It was Friday evening, and once again my mother was away with her friend, leaving the house empty and silent. Adam's summons was clear this time. There was no polite invitation, only a command, "Come." Despite the turmoil inside me, I gathered my resolve and stepped into his study. Adam sat at the edge of his desk, his eyes fixed on me as if measuring something I couldn't quite decipher. On the desk lay 2 glasses of whiskey, one of which he raised slowly before speaking. "I want to understand why we are so drawn to each other. It shouldn't be this hard, Julia." His words hit me like a physical blow. I stood there, caught off guard, my mind racing for an appropriate response. Before I could speak, he moved closer, his expression both earnest and troubled. With deliberate care, he reached out and removed a stray lock of hair from my shoulder. "I want to see the real you," he whispered, his fingers brushing lightly against my cheek. My throat tightened, and I managed a weak reply, "This is wrong." My voice wavered, lacking conviction even as I tried to hold on to my reason. Adam's gaze remained unyielding, and he offered a small, ironic smile. "Then why are you still here?" His words were simple, yet they stripped away any pretense of control I might have maintained. We stood so close that I could feel the warmth of his breath and the steady beat of his pulse. His hand settled on my waist, and my fingers found his wrist almost involuntarily. For a heartbeat, the space between us vanished. His lips hovered near mine, promising something I both craved and feared. Then, as abruptly as the intensity had built, a sound cut through the charged silence, a set of footsteps approaching. "Julia, are you there?" My mother's voice, unexpected and piercing, echoed from the hallway. I jerked back, shock surging through me. In an instant, Adam recoiled, his expression shifting to one of casual detachment, as if nothing had transpired. The door opened, and my mother's eyes flitted between us with a look that needed no words, a silent, accusing scrutiny that froze me in place. I barely recall the frantic escape that followed. My heart pounded so loudly I was almost deaf to everything else as I ran from the study. I retreated to my room, slamming the door behind me. Leaning against the cool wall, I struggled to piece together my scattered thoughts. My mother said nothing that evening, yet her silent gaze haunted me, leaving an indelible mark of disappointment and unspoken reproach. The next morning, the house was enveloped in a heavy, uneasy quiet. I moved through the familiar spaces like a ghost, the memory of the previous night echoing in every step I took. In the kitchen, I found a neatly folded note left by Adam. "I'm leaving for a few days. I'm sorry." The note was terse, almost clinical in its brevity, yet it carried the weight of our shared secret. I held the note for a long moment, reading and rereading its words. Deep down, I understood that his departure was not a resolution but merely a pause, a temporary retreat from a situation that had grown too intense, too complicated to ignore. Even as I tried to convince myself that this was the end of our dangerous dance, a stubborn part of me knew it was far from over. Throughout the day, I replayed every detail from that evening in my mind, the resolute command in his eyes, the intimate brush of his hand, the moment when our proximity threatened to break the boundaries I had built. Each memory was a blend of defiance and desire, a constant reminder that neither of us could simply walk away from what was unfolding. Later, as I sat alone in the quiet of my room, I realized that Adam's abrupt exit had only deepened the conflict within me. There was a part of me that resented the situation, that resented the way our lives had intertwined with secrets and unspoken longings. Yet another part of me was inexplicably drawn to him, to the intensity of the connection that defied all logic. It was a contradiction I couldn't resolve, a conflict that left me feeling both liberated and imprisoned by my own emotions. I knew that the events of that night and morning would not easily fade away. Adam's presence had seeped into every corner of my life, infecting my thoughts and coloring my emotions with a mix of guilt, desire, and foreboding. I wondered what his absence would mean, whether the space he left behind would allow us both to regain some semblance of control, or if it would only make the eventual confrontation all the more inevitable. As the day wore on, I forced myself to carry on with my routine, yet every mundane task was overlaid with a subtle tension. The quiet of the house, once comforting, now felt oppressive, as if the silence itself was brimming with unspoken words and hidden truths. I tried to focus on my studies and daily responsibilities, but my mind kept drifting back to the study, to Adam's piercing eyes and the promise of something forbidden that lingered between us. By evening, the unsettled mood had grown nearly unbearable. I sat at my desk, staring at the note Adam had left, and realized that his absence was not an end but a continuation of a story that neither of us had chosen, yet both of us were bound to. The risk of our connection, the danger of what it might unleash, hovered like a shadow over every thought I had. In that moment, I understood that our lives had been irrevocably changed. Adam's departure was only a temporary reprieve, a necessary break in a chain of events that was already in motion. The intensity of our interactions, the thrill and terror of every encounter, had set us on a collision course from which there was no easy escape. Whether we could ever untangle the web of desire, duty, and guilt remained uncertain. But one thing was clear: the spark between us had ignited something far deeper than either of us could have anticipated. I knew that it was only a matter of time before our paths would cross again, that the tension we had tried so hard to suppress would resurface with even greater force. Until then, I was left to grapple with the aftermath of that fateful night, a night when every word, every touch, had rewritten the rules of our relationship. Standing at the threshold of a future shrouded in uncertainty, I braced myself for what was to come. Adam's absence might bring temporary clarity, or it might only serve to deepen the void between us. But as I sat alone in the quiet morning, I could not shake the feeling that our story was far from over. The note on the counter was not a farewell, but a pause, a promise that, despite everything, our dangerous connection would soon be reignited. And deep in my heart, I knew that this turbulent journey was only just beginning.